So I've talked about because we are facing all these crises at once, and I've described it as a game of Kaplunk. And the government doing all these tax cuts, all these crazy economic things are essentially sort of pulling out the needles, and the Kaplunk is coming. And I have seen other economists talk about this and talk about how November is sort of where this could happen. And I'm very much in agreement with them because there's a lot of stuff that could happen in November that could cause this. And I'm not sure what will cause it, but when it does, they will pull out one of those needles and kaplunk, it will go. And we've seen very recently that the housing market has not responded well at all to these economic shifts, shall we say. And any crash, any housing market crash, will be entirely the fault of this government. It's their fault. It's their policies. It's their economic madness. And if we do get a housing market crash, I wonder if that will be what causes the whole thing to go kaplunk. I really do. But we're going to go into this story from the Byline Times because they explain it quite well about how this housing crash can indeed happen and how the government are essentially steering the ship straight into the iceberg. So before we go jumping into that, please do remember to hit the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me a Coffee, where you can, buy me a coffee. And as always, thank you very much to all those people who do help and support the channel. And of course, there is the YouTube thank you button and of course the YouTube subscription button as well. You can join where you get all sorts of bells and whistles when you sign up to that. So let's go over today to the Byline Times with their title of "The Iceberg Heading Straight Towards the Government is a Housing Market Crash." None of this looks good at all. So, UK markets have lost £500 billion in combined value since Liz Truss became the Prime Minister just 3 weeks ago, Bloomberg has reported yesterday. Thanks to the collapse of the pound, which has gone from $1.17 to just $1.07 in the space of a month, the financial hit is roughly equivalent to £350 million lost every 21 minutes from the UK markets. That's insane, because I saw that put out yesterday as well, that since Liz Truss has become Prime Minister, UK markets have lost every 21 minutes £350 million. What an absolute disaster. And it is no one else's fault but the fault of Liz Truss and these right-wing crazy libertarians that are in power. Because the big problem you get is, well, if you remove Truss, who gets put in next? You saw at the leadership contest how powerful the right wing of the Tory party, this exact same force that put in Liz Truss, is strong enough to just put someone else in. They will happily put, Kemi Badenoch or, Penny Mordaunt or maybe even Suella Braverman in to replace her. And it will just be the same thing again, just a new face, pronouncing all these new crazy initiatives that they've wanted to do for years. So, back to it. In other words, if we suspend reality and believe the Vote Leave claim that we send the £350 million a week to the EU, the recent collapse in the UK market is approximately to be 143 of those weekly payments. Nearly 3 years of alleged membership fees burned in less than a month. The Bank of England has now warned that there is potentially a market risk to the UK financial stability and has adopted measures it will hope to help stabilise the economy. This comes after their financial markets bet against the UK economy following the Chancellor's Kersey Katang's mini-budget last week. And Kadang announced a run of uncosted, basically, he didn't explain how he was going to pay for them, policies to benefit the rich, including lowering the top tax rates, removing the cap on bankers' bonuses, cancelling corporation tax and the national insurance rises, and even cutting stamp duty. And as the International Monetary Fund, the International Monetary Fund has said, quote, given the elevated inflation pressures on many countries, including the UK, we do not recommend large and unregulated financial packages at this juncture. It is important that fiscal policy does not work at cross purposes to monetary policy. Ergo, in order to curb inflation expected to peak at 11% in October, the Bank of England will be forced to elevate its interest rates more than the government measures up to push inflation by increasing the heat on the economy through these unfettered financial packages described by the IMF. More interest rates will rise. This, it seems, could be the apex of a new profound economic crash in the UK. The iceberg that is headed straight towards the government is the housing market. Dr. Joe Milleen, the Associate Professor of Economics for the University of West England, has told the Byline Times podcast. The government's policies will include higher interest rates, he says. The Bank of England will intervene and interest rates will be high. That's going to feed through into the mortgage rates, and I do struggle to see how the housing market doesn't crash. So, housing market crash coming. What joy, what joy we've got to look forward to. The importance of property to the UK economy, it has intensified since the 1980s, and Margaret Thatcher's economic reforms, let me give you my vision, a man's right to work is that he will spends what he earns to own property and to have the state as a servant, not its master. These are the British inheritance, she said at a first party conference speech in 1975. The steady, consistent growth of the private property market, underpinned by the continuous erosion of the social housing stock, has formed the basis for individual security and investment in Britain ever since. And the average price of a UK home has trebled during the Thatcher era, from £19,000 in 1979 to £59,000 in 1999. And this figure will hit £251,000 in 2010, and it now stands at £286,000 in London, and that figure is at least £543,000. So much for the economy, for better or for worse, mainly worse, is driven by housing price valuation, said Dr. Mitchell. This is where I think the wheels will really come off the government's so-called plan. This related to the government's Mark Stevens, and chair of the Land Prosperity and Urban Studies Growth in Glasgow, who says that while the budget has triggered this crisis, it is the price for a decade of marketing for every supposed entry into housing ownership while keeping house prices up. Indeed, we have already seen evidence that just this last week, a number of lenders, including Halifax, Britain's largest mortgage lender, have to withdraw some of their products until they figure out what the interest rate change will be. By 2023, the monthly mortgage repayments as a percentage of household nominal disposal income is expected to hit 30%, a figure last seen immediately before the 2008 financial crisis, which was spurred by the unsustainable levels of property debt. Sam Toms, the UK chief economist at Pantheon Macroeconomics, says that if the interest rates rise predicted, the average householding refinancing to a 2-year fixed rate mortgage in the first half of the next year would be seen as monthly payments jump to £140,000 from just £800 a month. They simply will not be able to afford this, he said. And that's the biggest worry. What do you do where you're getting all these massive rises at a time of cost of living crisis? Many just simply will not be able to pay for this. And what do you do? How do you solve a lot of these problems going forward? You simply don't. But you can see right here, you've had all these experts come on and say, look, it's being lined up. It's being lined up perfectly. all of it. And we are heading for a housing market crash. And because of how you said there, the UK economy is so fixated on property and housing prices. When we have a housing crash, it's a disaster. Mostly because of, again, Margaret Thatcher's reforms, and it's got even worse since 2008. So things are going to get bad, and I think the sign of things to come will be a housing market crash, and you will get, I think, essentially to begin, people will stop moving house. That will be the first thing. I think you will see a massive slowdown in people buying houses. I think even private landlords will struggle to even buy houses at this rate. You'll see the average mortgage rate increase, which could lead to massive repayment issues, not only just from private owners, but even landlords as well could struggle to pay the massive increase in mortgages because they will have to put rents up, which will cause another crisis. You can see where you can already see, just talking about the basic consequences, how quickly this can snowball. And yeah, we're headed straight into the iceberg of a housing market crash. It is not going to be good. And there's already worries this is going to come sooner rather than later. There was already talks yesterday and speculation that it was the mortgage market that the Bank of England had to step in to save. Now, we don't know if that's true or not, because there's also talk that it might have been pension funds. We're not 100% sure on that yet. I suppose we might never even find out whether that's true or not. We'll have to wait and see. But yeah. Um, what can I say? What can I say except yeah, it's going to be bad. It's going to be absolute madness and chaos. But oh boy, oh boy.